welcome to episode number 77 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. Wow, Gar, 77 episodes. Can you believe it, my friend?
77. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I can't wait till we get to 80 or 90 and 100. Hundreds that like what we're shooting for, and then we'll go way beyond that. But today, Gar, you and I had a fun idea to take our show in a direction we've never taken it before. Now, when people tune into our episodes, as I put on our Facebook page today, advertising we're going to do this, typically you expect us to be talking about our favorite classic TV shows, music, and movies. But most people probably listening to this wouldn't think that the soda we drink could have anything to do with pop culture history. But what we found out in the research for today's episode, it really does. And I'll tell you, Gar, if you remember how we came up with the idea to do this is I listened back to our old episode number 22 to be exact, of our countdown of our favorite classic TV commercials. And in that, we had mentioned the Pepsi Challenge. What is the Pepsi Challenge? We're going to talk all about that today because today's episode, folks, is about the Cola Wars. Pepsi versus Coke, the Pepsi Challenge. And not only are we going to tell you what the Pepsi Challenge is, but we're going to talk about how the two companies have been competing for years, and their TV ads and their commercials, and just how memorable some of those TV commercials are. When we look back on Coke and Pepsi. Did you ever think we'd be doing a show like this, Gar?
Well, it's just when we were talking about doing it, I just immediately, in my mind, I went back to the mid-70s.
Yeah.
When this all started, and I just remember it was a really kind of profound time.
Yeah.
Because what we're talking about is a marketing
campaign.
A marketing campaign that actually turned into a war.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of the perspective that's been lost over the years, that people don't, they think about it. Oh yeah, the Coke Wars or the Pepsi Challenge and stuff. But the reason why we're talking about it is because of the phenomenon of it. The fact that it all started out as a marketing campaign and immediately became a war.
Yeah, and Gar, so much to the point, even today, a lot of people are either Team Coke or Team Pepsi, and we're going to get into that. But, it's funny that I kind of forgot about the Pepsi Challenge until I went back and listened to our old episode on the classic TV commercials, and I got online immediately. I thought that would be a cool thing to do an episode, and I was amazed at all the videos and ads I found and stuff talking about the Pepsi Challenge, and I thought, wow, if I was there and I could forget about it, we need to remind people about what this was. Both the people that were there and people that are like, what are they talking about, the Pepsi Challenge? But Gar, another interesting thing about the Pepsi Challenge, and we're going to get into what that was, but very much like when you go and vote today, you get a sticker that says, I voted today. Well, back in the day when the Pepsi Challenge was going on, people would be given these stickers if they took part in the Pepsi Challenge, and it would say, I took part in the Pepsi Challenge. It got so big that they even started printing up not only stickers, but T-shirts that said that.
Oh, yeah, it was huge. Yeah. And it was really... I was really kind of excited about doing this is because I was around
back then,
completely aware of it while it was happening, and which really allows me to be able to give some insight and a little more clarity to a picture that's become kind of out of focus after all of these years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because when you look back, there's so many things about this that we lose focus on. Say, for example, just the label Pepsi Challenge and Coke Wars. Coke Wars wasn't a tagline that was being given to it to many, many years later.
Yeah.
And only because of how huge Coca-Cola is and how against all of this advantage that Pepsi was gaining from this marketing ploy. It really, the Cola Wars is that name was given many, many years later. During the time when it was actually happening, it was the Pepsi Challenge.
Yeah, and
it didn't have anything to do with cola at all, other than comparing Pepsi to cola.
Yeah, and
they weren't calling it Cola Wars. They weren't doing anything. At that time, back in the mid '70s when it launched, and for a long time after, it was the Pepsi Challenge.
Yeah, I mean, Gar, so much to the point that I don't know if cola was even a word back then, and because typically, let's be honest, I think between the two companies, Coke has been around the longest, and anytime, let's say, you're drinking anything at all, not just the official Coke brand, but any kind of soda, like generic soda somebody bought from a Dollar Tree or a 99-cent store, something like that, or the local grocery store, Dr. Pepper. A lot of people say, I love Coke, and so cola was even a word that was added later. But to get specific here, the Pepsi Challenge was a marketing campaign introduced by Pepsi in the 1970s, which was designed to have Pepsi compete against their biggest competitor, Coca-Cola, in a taste test. Now, and again, Coca-Cola, when they launched the Pepsi Challenge, had been around a lot longer, so people were more aware of it. It was a soda that was making the, I guess people were buying Coca-Cola, to be honest, the most, because it had been around the longest. And this was a taste test where people would go and they'd be blindfolded, and I guess the initial concept is to see when they're blindfolded and you're given the two things of soda, if you can tell the difference while you're blindfolded. Oh yeah, this is Coke or this is Pepsi. Now let me ask you, Gar, right off the bat, people are taking a blind taste test that is called the Pepsi Challenge. You don't think it's kind of skewing, people, playing with people's minds as far as like, oh, I like Pepsi. I like Pepsi. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it really did. That was the super sauce of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Was the comparison, because the comparison created the controversy. Mm-hmm. It created the. I'm a Pepsi person or I'm a Coke person. Yeah. You know what I mean? That whole challenge created that whole animosity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and again, Gar, when we're growing up, we don't necessarily know what goes into making a TV commercial and stuff. But the older you get, sometimes you learn about this stuff, as I believe you and I have, and you realize, wait a minute, if you watch all these Pepsi commercials from the Pepsi Challenge, do you think they're going to put people on their commercial that say they like Coke better? Of course not. So they get all the takes of people that like Pepsi, and they make a commercial from that. I mean, so that's another thing, how the marketing wasn't really 100% honest. Of course, that's the way they make TV spots.
Well, just in my research, I found a couple of places where they were mentioning that in the comparison, real head-to-head comparison. Yeah. Pepsi was actually winning in those comparisons, but it wasn't a dramatic where Pepsi was kicking Coke's ass and everybody was picking Pepsi over Coke.
Yeah.
But in real taste tests, Pepsi was actually really winning in head-to-head taste tests.
Yeah,
and so there is a bit of truth.
Yeah,
it's just that the reality of those taste tests is that Pepsi edged out Coke.
Well, here's
in winning in that competition. They just edged them out by a little bit.
Yeah.
They didn't win by a large margin.
And here's the interesting fact. They didn't like take any kind of count, like 10 out of 20 people, or 10 out of 10 out of 15 people choose Pepsi over Coke. It was never really got mathematical or actual factual about how many people it was, but what they started to kind of find out is that people would say they liked the taste of Pepsi over Coke simply because Pepsi had a sweeter taste.
Well, to me, I have to admit, I'm sure there's going to be people, lots of people that are going to have differing opinions, but I personally prefer Pepsi over Coke. To me, it just has a bit of a more refreshing aspect to it than Coke seems to have. Coke seems to just be just real heavy on the syrup, contained in in the mix. Between syrup and water, you know what I mean? But it just seems that to me, Pepsi is a little bit more refreshing than Coke. And if I have a choice, I'll pick the Pepsi over the Coke. I prefer it.
Interesting. So Gar Borras is actually Team Pepsi. That's cool to find out now. Also, the fact that this began to play out as far as people liking Pepsi Gar over Coke, the fact that Pepsi had a sweeter taste, that actually became part of a marketing campaign for this. Once they launched the Pepsi Challenge, whenever you'd see Pepsi TV ads, they started putting in the fact that Pepsi is the cola that has a sweeter taste. So just based on the marketing, what people were saying, came a new phrase.
Well, here's another aspect to the when they first launched the challenge, they were pouring in styrofoam cups, and now granted, both of them are being poured into a styrofoam cup. But you see, nowadays I think we're a little bit more sophisticated on the actual vessel that you're actually pouring a drink in can affect how your mind actually figures out what you're gonna like. And say, for example, here's what I'm getting at. Say when you drink a beer out of a can. Okay, now you take that same beer and pour it out of the can into a glass and drink it. It tastes different. Everybody knows there is a classic difference in the taste of that exact same beer when you're drinking it out of a can versus how it tastes when you're drinking it out of a glass. And what my point is when you're pouring it into a styrofoam cup, it really kind of affects how people are going to choose. And I think they would have been better served if they would have poured each in a glass. Because I think the comparison would be a bit different. But their choice at that time back in 1975 is they were pouring it in a styrofoam cup.
And who knows, Gar, but something like that could be as simple as the fact that they're going out and doing the Pepsi Challenge and taping these commercials and stuff got to be a bit costly. The fact that, hey, we'll just buy a bunch of styrofoam cups because the studio could save money that way. That's a lot of times what it comes down to. But to kind of add to what you were just saying, I also discovered this. It said by focusing on the taste, Pepsi found that they were able to shift consumer perception that Pepsi was the drink of a much younger generation, whereas Coke was a drink of the hippie generation. So just that there alone, play on the words that, hey, do you want to be part of a younger generation or of a older hippie generation? That plays with people's minds. Oh, hell, I want to be young. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the timing was for that aspect was perfect because the 70s was exactly that.
Yeah, yeah.
The 70s was post hippie. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But still heavily influenced by hippie, and hence. The very end of the 60s, the popularity of bell bottoms skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And then the entire decade of the 70s, the popularity of bell bottoms lasted the entire 10 years of the 70s.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember wearing bell bottoms all the way from the late 60s all the way to the late 70s.
Yeah, yeah. And
for a good 10 years. And fashions don't last that long. Fashions usually last maybe a few years to up to about 5 years. And then it's time for its change.
Yeah.
But the fashion, the popularity of bell bottoms lasted for a full 10 years, which is really an anomaly. Yeah. And also, proves your point about what you're saying about one being appealing to the hippie generation, which was that previous generation, and then the 70s, which was my generation, which is a post hippie generation.
Yeah, where like basically what it was saying too is this. Okay, if you want to be, do you want to be part of the younger generation, your generation, the generation of today? Or do you want to drink what the generation of your mom and dad drank?
And at that time, that was when the term generation gap was really super popular at that time.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that phrase was actually coined during that time because it was definitely a part of conversations in the 70s about how 70s kids were not into what their parents were into, which was the Perry Comos, the Dean Martins,
there you go.
the Frank Sinatras, all of those real popular musical acts of that time period. And 70 kids was like, ew,
yeah, you got it, man.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
And so that marketing ploy had super validity at that time because of the generation gap and how the generation was reacting to what was popular previous to them.
Yeah, and now, Gar, this is another fun fact I came across. It said that there were both print ads and TV ads for the Pepsi Challenge. Print ads obviously would be like a page in a magazine or a newspaper that they'd have, talking, Pepsi, check out the Pepsi Challenge, or this is where we're going to be. But they found people obviously responded more to the TV ads because you got actual people going on the commercial, doing the taste test, and you actually see people actual response, as they're doing the taste test. And so they were finding people were responding more to the TV ads for one thing.
Well, all I can say is at that time, that marketing ploy by Pepsi was a gold mine.
Yeah.
And they, it was really, true genius. Whoever thought up the idea to do that marketing ploy is a stroke of genius. And in many years, in hindsight, that is the consensus, is that marketing ploy was genius.
Yeah, I wasn't.
And
Yeah.
it was so successful. Now, here's the thing, though, is even though Pepsi had come up with a marketing ploy that was just out and out gold, they didn't win the war.
No.
And the reason why they didn't win the war is because at that time in the mid 70s, they really didn't know. Okay. Let me kind of clarify.
Sure.
Now, nowadays, companies, big companies built like Coke and Pepsi and all of these big companies are willing to spend millions and millions of dollars for our data.
Yeah.
Our data tells them things about how to do their marketing so they can hit home better and be more effective in their marketing.
Yeah.
But back in the mid 70s, they didn't know about data and they didn't know how to take advantage of a marketing gold mine like the Pepsi Challenge.
Yeah.
And had they really known more about what they can do, the things that have been developed today to take advantage of a boom like that, they're ready to pounce on it now because they know more about how to take advantage of those things. But back in the mid 70s, they didn't. They didn't have data. They didn't know how to analyze it.
Yeah.
And the means that they had at that time to analyze all of this stuff was so basic and so rudimentary compared to what it is today. And because of that, they were not able to capitalize on it and move the needle in their favor.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a hugely popular and hugely successful marketing campaign, but the bottom line is it didn't move the needle.
Yeah. And I wasn't able to find out who came up, who the genius was that came up with the idea for the Pepsi Challenge. I wish I could, but I'll tell you, a lot of like what you're talking about, how they collect the data today. I'm going to share this, Gar, with our audience and with you. The last couple episodes we've done of our show, somebody suggested this to me, and another avenue I now use in coming up with research for the show is Chat GPT. And what it does is you ask it, okay, like what I did for the research for today's episode, some of it is I asked, okay, give me trivia, facts, the history of what the Pepsi Challenge was. Not only does it give you those facts, but it does it in a chronological way. It organizes it nicely for you. I put it in my own words, but the point is I came up with a lot more data for today's episode than I would have if I would have just used my normal avenues only of the way I research for our episodes,
And see, that's how much more advanced we are today.
Yeah.
And just to compare how advanced technology is now.
Yeah.
And to look back at where we were with technology back in the mid 70s when the Pepsi Challenge was going on, it's just an astronomical difference.
Yeah.
And you can't look back at those days, through a lens of what we know now.
Yeah.
And cast judgment, on what was going on back then, because you can't take advantage. Part of the astronomical difference between today versus 1975 is the difference between where technology is nowadays versus where technology was back in those days, which was way woeful.
Yeah.
compared to what it is nowadays. I mean, literally, we scratch our heads and wonder how people were able to actually function in life back in those days.
Yeah.
Generations now that have never experienced how life was back in the 1970s. Now, if they get a chance to get glimpses, the younger generations now that know nothing about it scratch their heads and wonder, how did people function back in those days?
Yeah, I mean,
how in the world were people able to, it will be completely mind-boggling to people of these generations now that know nothing about how life was back in the mid-70s.
Yeah, great example of what you're talking about, Gar, is like it boggles my mind when I think of what the world was like before the automobile, and even to the point where let's go back in history and think when people traveled by covered wagon, or the mail was delivered by the covered wagon, and it took days and days to get someplace. It's like, man, I don't know if I'd want to live back then, but it sure would have been interesting.
Well, but then also when you think about these comparisons like that, say for example the introduction of the automobile. Now, the automobile is a dramatic advancement of mankind.
Yeah.
Okay? When it actually took a foothold in the livelihood of mankind, at that time, it has all kinds of huge beneficial things to offer to mankind.
Sure.
But then, just like everything, the rule in life is everything has an equal and opposite.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is when they introduced the automobile, yes, it had all these wonderful benefits.
Yeah.
But then all of these old things, the old way of doing things,
died off.
Yeah. It went by the wayside. Yeah. And what I mean by that is there's a certain sadness about that because whole industries that used to support how travel used to be before the automobile. Mm-hmm. I mean, whole industries collapsed.
Yeah.
Because there was no need for those industries. Stable businesses.
Yeah.
All of these things that functioned in travel that supported how travel was before the automobile completely collapsed.
Yeah.
So you have the positive of what automobiles had to offer to society, but you also have the negative side.
Sure.
And we are experiencing that right now in our lives because things are changing. And things are changing where there are positive things that these changes have to offer to mankind.
Sure.
But in having those things become, there's the old way that becomes completely unnecessary and archaic. You see what I'm saying? And no longer a need for, and those things die out.
Yeah.
And we are experiencing those exact same things in our lives right now.
Oh, sure we are. Gar, and here's another fun fact. Getting back to the Pepsi challenge, it said this is very interesting, very much to like you were saying about if you have a taste test like this and you give people the 2 cups of soda in a styrofoam cup, it's going to taste a certain way. But this is what they found in regards to the taste. Pepsi's sweeter taste often fares better in short sips, which reports indicated had a result on the taste test. So
that, but also Pepsi was being accused at that time of having the Coke samples that were being poured into the cup was a lot colder.
Wow. See, again.
Than the Pepsi. The Pepsi that was being served at refrigerator temperature.
Yeah.
But the Coke that was being poured into the cups was just above freezing.
Wow.
So it was still liquid, but it was a lot colder, which was affecting the taste challenger. Now, nobody knows the truth in that. Because I don't think it was ever proved.
Yeah.
But that is an accusation that was floating around at that time.
Yeah. And again, Gar, I've always wondered why, why the other soda companies, when they seen Pepsi have the success of this, didn't jump on the bandwagon. Oftentimes, when one company's successful, some other companies will, oh, we're going to try that. I often wonder, why wasn't there, 7-Up versus Sprite, challenge or something like that? But I think they would have been accused of being a copycat,
Well, public's reaction would be reacting to it as if it's a copycat.
Yeah,
it's just like when you have a main movie that comes out and it becomes so popular. Oh, we got to come out with part 2.
Yeah.
And the part 2 is always
worse.
Not as good. You know what I mean? Classically, that has always been the case. Not always.
Yeah.
But classically, that has always been the case.
So Gar, as we get through the first part of today's episode, we've talked a lot about telling people what the Pepsi Challenge was. Now, the second half of the show is going to get real interesting because this we're going to start talking about Coke's response to this in 1985 was to introduce New Coke, which was much more, it had a sweeter taste than the regular classic Coca-Cola. And they did that to start competing with Pepsi because everybody was saying, oh, Pepsi has a sweeter taste. So Coke's like, okay, maybe we need to have a new formula, create a new Coke that tastes sweet. What are your memories of New Coke?
Well, okay. Now, I have a lot to add to this. But number one is Coke would not have done that had they not blinked.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Is they actually, they reacted to it.
Yeah.
And it's Coke's reaction to Pepsi having the balls to make this comparison. You know what I mean? Yeah. But had Coke not reacted the way that they did, Pepsi Challenge would not have been as big as it was. Yeah. It was Coke reacting to it.
Yeah.
And they didn't just react one way by coming up with this new Coke, this new version of Coke. That was just a big reaction to it.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of other things that Coke did, that showed that they were really troubled. They were really affected by the popularity of the Pepsi Challenge.
Yeah, and
it was that reaction that made the whole thing explode.
And actually, Gar, they were reacting it even sooner than they launched New Coke in 1985. I was reading 2 years before that, in 1983. The first reaction to that was the fact that they launched Diet Coke. Now, today, a lot of people are, Diet Coke, it's healthier, but it's got less sugar. So for health reasons, you should drink Diet Coke or whatever. But that's not why they launched Diet Coke initially. They thought, okay, we'll have something sweeter too. And then what they found out at the time was, all of a sudden, not only was Coke competing with Pepsi, but Coke was competing with Diet Coke, its own product, and Diet Coke was outselling Classic Coke. I mean, so that was their first problem they had.
Yes. It just, timing is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And because, Pepsi had come up with the challenge at the time that they did.
Mm-hmm.
It was ripe for all of these other things to happen.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? It's just like the planets were aligned at that time.
Yeah.
You see, and that's why these things wound up happening.
Yeah, and to talk a little more about the new Coke, which was launched in 1985, Gar. Do you remember the Max Headroom Coke, new Coke commercial? He started kind of becoming the mascot for that. Do you remember who Max Headroom was?
Oh, Max Headroom back in the 80s was huge. Yeah. I mean, huge. Max Headroom was just as popular as Spud McKenzie.
Yeah.
At the same time, Spud McKenzie for Bud Light, I think that's what it was, or Budweiser beer. I think it was Bud Light.
Yeah.
But Spud McKenzie was a hugely popular marketing campaign.
Yeah.
And so was
Max Headroom.
Max Headroom.
In fact,
huge popular marketing campaign.
People that don't know what we're talking about can look Max Headroom up. I found plenty of new Coke commercials from like 1985, I think, and 86, featuring Max Headroom. Max Headroom's best described as, like an advertising mascot. It was kind of like they look at it now as kind of one of the first computer-generated characters, because that was before that really became popularized, in the 90s and stuff. But that was one of the first times that was done, and Max Headroom just kind of became the face of New Coke. And what's interesting is I was doing a little research on Max Headroom today, and Max Headroom was actually created a few years before appearing in the Coke commercials. The guy who created him had like a show somewhere, but it was not. The character did not really break out in a huge way until the new Coke commercial.
Well, it was super popular. Now, I don't know if we have listeners that are outside of Southern California, which is where you and I reside.
Yeah, I'm sure we do.
But here in Southern California, there's a popularity of 80s clubs.
Yeah.
And there's Club 80s in Corona. There's Totally 80s in Fullerton. There's a number of them. It's kind of like a franchise kind of thing. And when you walk into a Club 80s, people don't know it, but I do.
Yeah.
It's like you walked right into a Max Headroom commercial.
Yeah. That's true.
And it really is. And if people get a chance to people that listen to the show that maybe live in Southern California that know about what I'm talking about, and has been to one of these clubs, if you go back and on YouTube and catch a Max Headroom commercial, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And it says that Coke's response, or Coca-Cola's response to the backlash of New Coke, was to remove New Coke immediately from the market and bring back what they started referring to as Classic Coke. It's a classic.
Yes. Yeah. And it really facilitated when they brought back Classic Coke. It really facilitated a big spike in the popularity of Classic Coke. Because just all those people that were rejecting New Coke. They were so happy they had their Classic Coke back.
Yeah, and I don't even know, Gar, if it had so much to do with it was an awful taste, but it's one of those things that people start they have a thing about, hey, don't you take away my Coke, don't you take away the Coke I like. Maybe even if they would have offered both versions, maybe there wouldn't have been such a huge backlash. But it's funny that immediately they just, okay, we're going to start using the old formula, it's Classic Coke, and people start buying it again.
Well, I think it was more like people were like just celebrating that they had their
Coke back. Yeah.
classic Coke back. Yeah,
Yeah. And here's another fun fact. It said, as years went on and continued doing the Pepsi challenge, it said many people got to a point of believing that it was a clever advertising campaign that favored Pepsi because Pepsi had a sweeter taste, and because of that, many people believe that the Pepsi challenge did not honestly reflect consumer reflection of choosing Pepsi over Coke in an honest, accurate way. Again, kind of fact that you called the Pepsi challenge, maybe that leads people, I like Pepsi. You just don't know.
Well, when I was a kid,
yeah.
a lot of people don't know this. The older generation that might listen to our show will know about what I'm talking about. There were actually 3 Coca-Colas that were popular when I was a kid back in the 60s.
Okay.
There was Coca-Cola, there was Pepsi-Cola, and there was RC-Cola.
Yeah.
And RC is the one that I think it still exists today. I'm not sure if it's been a resurgence, but it fell by the wayside. Over time, and now that's all that's left is Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and the, generations now don't know anything about RC Cola. But back in the 60s, RC Cola was, part of the top 3.
In fact, Gar,
you could pick, and I couldn't tell the difference between RC Cola and Pepsi. I really couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah, Gar, in fact...
But you definitely can tell the difference between the taste of a Pepsi
and a Coke.
And a Coca-Cola.
Yeah, Gar, and it's funny you bring up... Because I remember they used to... RC is really Royal Crown Cola. And I remember, hearing about Royal Crown Cola on episodes of All in the Family, if you can believe it, because that was a meathead, Rob Reiner's... character's favorite soda, and he'd often talk about Royal Crown soda. I remember seeing that often.
Well, and on East Coast, they call it pop.
Yeah, there you go.
Calling it soda is a West Coast thing.
Yeah.
But on East Coast, give me a pop.
Yeah. I remember. And Gar, another fun part of our research was I sent you a bunch of these classic, and again, that's one of the things that's fun about doing our show. That I forgot about a lot of these classic like Coca-Cola commercial, and there was a time in the 80s where Bill Cosby of all people was a spokesperson for Coca-Cola, and I tell you, I had fun going back and watching these ads because back in the day, we think of him as a pitchman for those Jello Gelatin commercials, but I forgot he did these Coke commercials, and man, he was a great pitchman back in the day.
Well, I mean, that was a huge thing for him. He, we know about Jello.
Yeah.
I mean, he was all over the place.
Yeah.
Pitchman.
Yeah.
He was highly sought after in the 70s as a pitchman.
And
whenever he pitched. He just had a style to how he pitched a product that just made it all nice and warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, and I also sent you a couple of the classic like Pepsi commercials that have featured celebrities throughout the years, and some of those ads that I sent obviously included the following people: Michael Jackson, Cindy Crawford, Britney Spears, Lionel Richie. Now I had real fun. Checking out the Cindy Crawford Pepsi commercial. I mean, because it's funny. She's still very much, she's a lot older, but she still looks a lot like she did back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. She's kind of like the Dick Clark of women models.
The youngest teenager. Yeah.
You know what I mean? She's kept that look for such a long time. She must be a vampire.
Yeah, I guess. And Gar, also the Michael Jackson Pepsi commercial, we got to talk about that. That's another thing we brought up. If people go back and check out our episode 22.
Can I bring up something?
On the classic TV commercials. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I bring up something?
Sure.
Because you brought up Michael Jackson.
Sure.
Now, I don't know if you know this, but the Michael Jackson commercial that he did for Pepsi, where he's dancing,
Yeah.
and he's got the jewel glove on,
Yeah.
and in that commercial, you see a small kid dressed up like I mean, he's the spitting image of Michael.
Yeah, yeah.
Standing right next to Michael, doing the Michael Jackson moves and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Do you know who that kid is?
Yes, Gar. I was just getting ready to bring up. If people go, that was Alfonso Ribeiro, but people know also from Silver Spoons. This predates Silver Spoons, and he was also eventually on the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But
he was a Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. You know, he was the main sidekick character
to Will Smith.
Will Smith on that show.
Yeah.
Everybody knows him from that show, but he was also the host for America's Funniest Videos.
Oh, yeah.
For a long time, he was the host of that.
Wow.
But that was his debut. Was in that commercial with Michael Jackson. That was his debut.
Yeah.
And I remember learning about that at the time. When I just remember finding out about that later that, hey, that's the same guy. That's just him when he was just a little kid.
It's like before.
And man, does he nail Michael Jackson?
Yeah, and Gar,
he is incredible in that commercial.
And that commercial was before anybody really knew who he was. I mean, I guess he was just starting out in commercials, but think if you're Alfonso Ribeiro and that's like the first thing that kind of launched you. I mean, that's a pretty big thing to be not only in a Pepsi commercial, but a Michael Jackson Pepsi commercial, especially the King of Pop no longer, being here. But that's what I was getting ready to say, that we first discussed that very Pepsi commercial in episode 22, where we talked about our favorite classic TV commercials. So people want to hear a little more about that, they could go check out episode 22. I posted on our Facebook page for today, so people can check it out if they want. But in wrapping up today's episode, said the Cola Wars, Pepsi versus Coke. Coca-Cola's advertising has always focused on nostalgia. Gar, that's kind of like classic Coke. Family, wholesomeness. Coca-Cola ads have often been described as family friendly. Coca-Cola ads also rely on cute characters such as the Coca-Cola polar bear mascots, and Santa Claus around Christmas time.
Well, I think earlier you were, mentioning, not knowing who came up with the idea for the Pepsi challenge.
Yeah.
Now, I think the reason why is because it was. Have you ever watched the TV show Mad Men?
I remember it slightly, but it wasn't something I was a huge fan of.
I highly recommend
checking it
watching that.
Okay.
And the reason why I cannot recommend it enough.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because I grew up in the 60s.
Yeah.
And I cannot stress enough how accurately that show depicts how life was back in the 1960s.
Okay.
A lot of things that we don't know about how life was back in the 1960s, what was considered normal and everyday back in the 1960s that we know nothing about, you get a window of that in watching that show because it is very truthful and very, very accurate as to how life was back in the 1960s.
Okay.
Social norms that are very different than the way they are. Things that were acceptable back in those days versus how they are not acceptable today.
Wow.
And all of that stuff.
I will check that out.
Getting back to what I was saying.
Yeah.
Now, that's the reason why I recommend it.
Okay.
Now, it's companies like Pepsi and Coca-Cola that come to these ad agencies to come up with these marketing ideas.
Yeah,
and what their strategy is for marketing and how the commercials are going to be. So that's the reason why you really don't know who the person is. It was actually provided to Pepsi by a marketing agency.
I'm sure you're right about that, and that's the thing is as we displayed in today's episode. When you think back on Coke and Pepsi throughout the years, there are certain things that you associate with each company. I mean, something as simple. Let's talk for a minute, Gar, about the design of a Coke can versus a Pepsi can. Coke, of course, the colors are red and white. Pretty simple. Now, Pepsi went a step further, and Pepsi's colors are red, white, and blue, just like the American flag. And I was reading about that. They did that purposely because it led many people to believe, you know what? Drinking Pepsi is the American way. Drinking Pepsi is very patriotic.
And rightly so, because for many years, Americans always associated red, white, and blue with patriotism.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
We look at it as a marketing strategy, but we don't know how Americans in previous generations mentally digested these things.
And what's funny? Yeah.
For many generations before our generations, Americans really hardcore associated red, white, and blue with patriotism.
Yeah, and along the way, Gar, if you noticed over years, Pepsi even changed. They didn't change the colors, but like back in the day, a Pepsi can used to be main part of the can was white and the end of red and blue. Where if you look at the Pepsi bottles and can now, the main part of the bottles are blue. They kind of switch the colors around, and it's just kind of a classic way of doing things. Like, you know what, we're going to make these changes, but we're still using the same colors. It's just kind of maybe to get people's attention that we're going for a different look. But before we wrap up today's episode, Gar, and we're getting there, this is another thing when we did our episode on the Miracle on 34th Street. We brought up the fact that Coca-Cola has used Santa Claus over the years in many of their holiday commercials. And so I was able to find out a little more about that. So while we're talking about Coca-Cola and Pepsi Day, this is a great time to bring this up. It said the association of Santa Claus in Coca-Cola ads dates back to 1931 when Coca-Cola hired artist Hadam Sablam to create an image of Santa Claus for their holiday Christmas advertising campaign. Sablam's version of Santa Claus was inspired by the poem A Visit from St. Nicholas, more commonly known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, written by Clement Clarke Moore in 1822. So just think about that for a minute. They started using the image of Santa Claus in 1931 in the Coca-Cola ads. Kind of interesting, huh?
Well, everybody's trying to come up with, ideas, marketing,
campaign.
People,
yeah.
Ideas, that would grab hold with the public. Back in those days, they had no data to base any of this on. And so it was more of a kind of a, hey, let's
try this. Yeah.
It was a guessing game, back in those days.
Yeah.
Compared to what back in those days, it was a guessing game compared to today, where there is no guesswork at all. It's all based on data.
Yeah. And I should note that back when they started using Santa Claus in the advertisements in 1931 was years before the Pepsi Challenge ever existed. It said in the early 20th century, Gar, Coca-Cola was looking to expand its market value. During the winter months, now this is another thing you never think of. It says, during the winter months, they found back then, soda sales typically declined back then, and that's why Coca-Cola then decided to incorporate Santa Claus into its advertising campaign. It must be said that the association of Coca-Cola and Santa Claus to this day remains one of the most iconic examples of branding and advertising.
Absolutely. Hey, there's also, this is just a side note.
Sure.
But it's an East Coast thing to take. I don't know any Coke, say like a Pepsi or a Coca-Cola, and it's an East Coast thing to put milk in it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
People in the West Coast don't do that. People in the West Coast don't even know about that.
Yeah,
but that's an East Coast thing.
Wow.
That's a thing that I don't think that it's really not a well-known thing here on the West Coast that people on the East Coast do that.
Another thing that reminds you of is, do you remember watching on Laverne and Shirley? How she would always, her favorite drink was Penny Marshall's character Laverne. Her favorite drink was Pepsi and milk. Milk and Pepsi.
Hey, that's an East Coast thing.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
See, that's a little bit of a window to what I'm talking about. And there's another thing, the interesting, kind of fun fact, about both Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, the company was founded in 1896.
Wow.
Like 4 years before the turn of the century.
Wow, there you go, and they're still around.
Pepsi was founded in 1902.
Wow.
Only 6 years apart. So both companies are over a century old.
Wow, that is pretty amazing. And even talking about like a character on a TV show like Laverne DeFazio mentioning her favorite drink is Pepsi and milk, milk and Pepsi. When these companies or anything really starts getting mentioned like on a popular TV show, you know that you've kind of arrived. And while we talk a lot about the TV ads and stuff today, Gar, also you started seeing like when you go to the movies, Pepsi might have sponsored the making of a movie, so they'd feature Pepsi or Coke in the movie, or something like that. And also the two companies, Pepsi and Coke, especially throughout the 80s. You go to see a live band play at a concert, sponsored by Coca-Cola, sponsored by Pepsi, and they're still doing that.
Yeah, some things, just stay popular for really long times. It's all about the public.
Yeah.
And how the public feels, about that stuff. Now, I have to admit, doing this episode, that I don't drink Pepsi or Coke anymore, anywhere near the way I used to drink it when I was much younger.
I will tell you, Gar,
I know how bad for you both of those are.
I will tell you, Gar,
But here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. I have not completely eliminated those from my diet. What I do, because I eat, really relatively healthy. You know what I mean? But I'm not OCD about it.
Yeah.
But what I do is I really do eat pretty darn healthy.
Yeah.
But what I do is I do not completely go cold turkey on all of the things that I love that are bad for me that I can't eat on a daily basis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a known fact that if you do that, there's going to be an accumulative thing that over the years that I'm going to pay for it later on in my life.
Yeah, it's funny.
You know what I mean?
It's funny you bring that up, Gar.
Those things. So let me finish what I'm saying.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
I do not eliminate those things. I just don't eat. I don't say like if I go off the wagon and I have something. So I don't completely eliminate the things that are bad for me.
Sure.
I just don't. I don't do them often, And so now they're a treat. And to be honest with you, I really enjoy them. And what that does is that it keeps me from resenting the healthy eating that I do.
Oh, wow.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
When you go cold turkey on everything that that is bad for you, you resent the diet. You resent the modifying of your eating habits.
Wow,
and when you resent it, that is what causes you to fall off the wagon and you quit the diet. If you stay on the healthy eating but treat yourself, periodically and keep those things at bay, only treating yourself, you don't resent the diet.
Oh, Gar, I got to share with you. I kind of had the opposite experience in the sense that for most of my life, what I refer to myself as a soda junkie. I mean, I just loved soda. I would drink like 3 or 4 glasses a day, and it got to the point that obviously I started gaining some weight. So about maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, I thought, I'm gonna see if I can go without having any soda, and I stopped dropping weight, obviously. And I never thought that I could go this long, but I have not had a soda since. I drink other stuff like flavored water now. Like you said, I have other things I enjoy, so I continue not to drink it. But I think that's part of the reason why doing an episode like today brings back a lot of fond memories. Because it was a big part of my life, even these TV commercials. And kind of wrapping it up for today, it says, while Coca-Cola did not invent Santa Claus or his red and white suit, it was Coca-Cola advertising that popularized the image of Santa Claus globally around the world, making it synonymous with Coca-Cola and the holiday season. I mean, let's think about that.
Well, Coca-Cola is a global company, and it's hard for us to imagine this here in the United States, because, we just know mostly about what's popular where we live and everything. But, when you're talking about a company like, Coca-Cola, you're talking global. And of course, it's only natural that their advertising is going to have a global, influence on the rest of the world too, and the rest of the world for many. I mean, just as long as I can remember, the rest of the world always looked at the United States as the beacon for everything that's interesting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Entertainment, technology, whatever. We've always been known. We're the rest of the world is catching up and nipping at our heels now, and the United States should really pay attention to that. Because just sitting there, resting on your laurels, thinking that it's just going to last forever is not a good recipe. But that's a whole different subject.
Yeah.
When you're talking about a global company like Coca-Cola, it's going to have whatever influence it's going to have. It's going to be a global influence.
Yeah, and Gar, to kind of put the cap on the Cola Wars today, the final thing I want to mention about Coca-Cola, because this is another thing people think of when they think of Coca-Cola. The Coca-Cola polar bear mascot first appeared in Coca-Cola ads, if you can believe it, in 1922 in a French print ad. And then it said, in 1993, Pepsi released the animated TV commercial, Northern Lights. The commercial featured a group of polar bears enjoying Coca-Cola. And ever since, that polar bear mascot has became a main feature of Coca-Cola ads.
Yeah, it's nice and warm and fuzzy.
There you go.
Appeal to everyone. Who is gonna not like a that is not gonna be warm to that type of marketing strategy.
Yeah, and Gar,
I mean?
This was fun doing today, and I really had a lot of fun. This will be going up next Saturday, of course, when we normally post our shows. But I want to let folks know that next time we do this, Gar and I came with a great idea. We're going to do a Valentine's theme show talking about different times from throughout pop culture history related to Valentine's. That's gonna be a real fun one to do, Gar.
Yes. I mean, Valentine's is a huge part of pop culture.
Yeah.
The sheer existence of Valentine's is birthed out of pop culture.
Oh, sure. How could it not be? And that's going to even maybe include like Valentine themed songs and stuff. So we'll get into that next time. Thanks for doing this, Gar. It was a ton of fun.
My pleasure.
Bye.